Hi, this is Skip Steward, the Chief Improvement Officer for Baptist Memorial Healthcare. This happened to be a picture of me when I had the privilege and honor of speaking at KATA 3, a conference put on by Lean Frontiers in February of 2017. The question that I was trying to answer at the conference was, how does KATA play with others at Baptist Memorial Healthcare? Now, you may ask yourself, what is a KATA? Well, a kata is a routine you practice, so its pattern becomes an automatic habit that gives you some new skills. At Baptist Memorial Healthcare, we don't use a lot of words like lean or Six Sigma, not that anything's wrong with those words, but we would rather talk about the Baptist management system. A lot of times with those words also, people have a straw man inside their mind of what they think that word means, so then you have to build up or tear down that straw man. And for the last 3 to 4 years in the development of the Baptist management system, we've been able to develop it the way that we would like. And at the bottom of this blue brain, it says, show me your thinking. So anytime we do any kind of workshops or training or activity, we give a blue brain instead of a certificate. We're trying to promote good thinking patterns. The main part of this thinking pattern is what we call kata. At Baptist Memorial Healthcare, headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee, we have kata activities going on throughout all of our hospitals, throughout the Baptist Medical Group, many of our clinics, through corporate HR, Baptist Trinity, which is our hospice, home health, and durable medical equipment side of the business, and the Baptist Technology Services, which is Baptist One Care, or what some know as EPIC, in the IT area, and our research. At the Baptist College of Health Science, we're doing some great kata work. We're also doing some great work at the Baptist and Sims Murphy joint venture, and then also specifically working with Sims Murphy. Every single day, Monday through Friday, doing this, what we call kata. So at first, let me talk a little more about what kata is. It's our mental model that makes up the Baptist management system. It's based off the work and research of Mike Rother that wrote the book Toyota Kata, and this is what's known as the improvement kata. Now we've taken it and we've baptized it. On the far right is our logo. All I've done is add the word vision to it. But then we quickly get into the model. The first part is the challenge. A challenge is a strategic imperative. It's a game changer. It could be 1 to 3 years out. We normally like to put it out 52 weeks from now. So in 52 weeks, what would we like to achieve? Not what we want to do, but what would we like to achieve? And so a great example of a challenge in our country's history is when President Kennedy said we would have a man put on the moon and return safely by the end of the decade. That's a great challenge. The reason it's good is because it had a date connected to it and it was verifiable. The second part of this mental model is grasping the current condition. Now, in the current condition, we mean a lot more than just the result metrics. We mean more than just the number of falls or the infection rate or your collection rates. We actually are wanting to know the process metrics. We also want to know the pattern of work. To use a sports analogy, we want to know more than just the scoreboard. We want to know how you're playing the game that produces the score. The third part is establishing the next target condition. The magic word there is next, because it implies there will be multiple target conditions on our way to the challenge. So if a challenge is set for 52 weeks out, a target condition may only be 2 to 3 weeks out. And if you want a higher level metric, then we would be asking the question, how are you going to play the game different to get that metric? The fourth part is we want to make a list of the obstacles that are separating us from our target condition. We want to pick one, and then we want to iterate through that obstacle, one obstacle at a time, or what we like to call PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust. Now, there's a couple things to think about with this model. This model is content neutral, meaning I can use it in both clinical and non-clinical areas. I can use it in healthcare. I can use it outside of healthcare. It's also fractal. I can use this model when having a conversation with a CEO, or I can use this model when I'm having a conversation with a frontline worker. Also, it's a very iterative process. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a meta routine that stays the same regardless of the circumstances. It's a routine way of acting and thinking. Now, here becomes the challenge. To try to get this mental model into our behavior, into our mind, we have to practice. And so we have to have a coach to help us practice. So we also have a coaching kata. So all throughout Baptist, you'll see folks with this little card hanging from their badge. The front is blue, the backside is black, and we're trying to coach the learner into that mindset. And these questions are just the headings, so you can ask questions in between that, but this is a scientific way. The reason I say scientific way, is because unfortunately in our society, the word coach has become very generic, to where everyone thinks they're a coach, maybe because they have a title or they've got some kind of certification, but really coaching is a skill that has to be learned and practiced. We're also an organization that we want to be built on principles. So we want to make sure the Baptist management system is built on principles. I happen to have the privilege and honor of being a Shingo examiner, and these are the principles that make up the Shingo model. We would probably add a couple more principles. For example, at the very bottom under cultural enablers, we talk a lot about empathy. But one way to think about these principles is they're organized around people, process, purpose, and stakeholders. And we want to make sure that the Baptist management system has these principles embedded inside of it. One of the mistakes that I made early on, 3 to 4 years ago, when we were first putting the Baptist management system together, is people would ask me in passing, hey, Skip, that TWI, training within industry, the job instructions, job relations, job methods, is it part of the Baptist management system? And they would ask me, what about leader standard work? And Toyota KATA, and value stream mapping, and strategic deployment, and A3, is that part of the Baptist management system? And I would say, oh yes, it's all under the same umbrella. That is a terrible analogy. The reason that's bad is it implies that those are all separate individual parts. And that goes against the definition of what a system is. See, our words matter. Our words are the pictures of our thoughts. So if we're going to call it the Baptist management system, we better understand what a system is. The late Dr. Russell Ackoff, the father of system thinking, would say that a system is a whole that cannot be separated into individual parts. A whole that cannot be separated into individual parts. He would go on to say that an example of a system is a car. The purpose of a car is to get you from point A to point B, but no part of a car by itself can get you from point A to point B. The engine can't, the axle can't, the steering wheel can't. It's only when the parts interact do they bring about that property. Even not only is that the case, but if you cut those interactions, the individual parts lose their properties. For example, the engine's property is to create movement. You take an engine out, lay it on the ground, it can't even move itself. So we need to understand what a system is if we're going to talk about the Baptist management system. I've been using this model lately to try to explain how the management system works. This is a gear train, and it has resonated with a lot of people, I think maybe because it's shaped in a hierarchical format like organizations, but it's just a model. As a famous statistician said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. I also like to remind myself of the second law of thermodynamics called entropy. Entropy says that everything is in a constant state of deterioration and degradation. And so I need to remind myself that sustainment is very tough. So I've been using this model to try to explain how the Baptist management system parts are connected. A lot of times folks will say, shouldn't that plan, do, study, adjust be at every level within the organization? And the answer is absolutely yes. But then also someone's going to say, well, that's fine, but how do you make that happen in the real world? And that's what I'm going to attempt to try to explain. Here is a picture of Brad Parsons, the CEO of NEA Baptist, and Kyle Sanders in the background there, the Chief Financial Officer. They're in a room that they like to call the safe room. Sometimes people will call it an Obeya room or a war room or a think tank. I think one group even calls theirs the incubator room. But this is a room where they do strategic planning. At the top of that cork board, you can see what we would call our true north, maybe strategy statements for our organization. We want to make sure we're providing the right care at the right time, at the right place, at the right cost. the right care at the right time, at the right place, at the right cost. Underneath each one of those, you could have one or more columns or pillars. Each column or pillar represents a strategic gap that must be shut. And so one thing to think about is we have a key thinker or a thought leader that owns each pillar. So let me kind of walk you through one pillar. You see under there, under right care, there's two. There's actually three now. So the first sheet of paper is a strategic A3. It's broken into 5 parts, and we give folks a little tool to explain to them how to fill it out. But the first part is the gap, the strategic gap that must be shut. And then it moves into a reflection section. And then the third part, it moves into what are the set of hypotheses, the if-then statements that you're predicting will shut that gap. That's the left side of that sheet of paper. That's the plan. And then as you move to the right, you have a set of plans and subordinate plans. And then you have a follow-up. So that sheet of paper is literally broken out into plan, do, study, adjust. That is being worked on this summer and is getting ready for the fiscal year that starts October 1. They'll normally continue to work on it for the first couple weeks into the fiscal year, and somewhere mid-fiscal, that month of October, it'll get frozen because it becomes an artifact of our thinking. The second sheet of paper is the status A3, and that's really where they do their studying and adjusting, the thought leader does. And so the third sheet of paper is a set of metrics. So every single month, the thought leader is going to come up and they're going to have about 10 minutes to review where they're at. Are they behind? Are they on schedule? What adjustments have they made? Their counterparts are asking them questions. So if they're doing that every month, that means in between those monthly cadences, they're talking to the areas that they're depending on that are supporting the closure of that gap, supporting their strategy. So they're playing what we call catch ball to make sure that we're on target, what adjustments do we have to make, and so on. So they are conducting plan, do, study, adjust at the highest level. Then we have what we call huddle boards in the departments. They're like a mini version of the safe room, and they have a weekly meeting. So the safe room has a meeting every month. The huddle boards have it every week. They're also focused around the right care at the right time, at the right place, at the right cost. But they may not be able to do work under every single one of those. So depending on the thought leader, they may only be working in 1 or 2 areas in their department. But they're using something that looks like the strategic A3, but it's called the tactical A3. They've determined a gap in their department that needs to be shut. They also have a status A3, and they have a set of metrics. A much better picture would probably be this one. So here's Robert talking through with the team at a weekly meeting. What are the gaps that need to be shut? What are the initiatives? What kind of adjustments are they having to make? And so they may not be working under every single area of right care, right time, right place, and right cost. Then you have the daily experimentation, what some like to call the storyboard or the KATA board. So you have a learner and you have a coach. You always have a learner, you always have a coach. At the top right of the board, you have a challenge and a 52-week challenge, and they're experimenting their way forward on that board every day. And this challenge is connected to the huddle board, which is connected to the safe room. Here's another example. You have a learner, you have a coach, and you have a second coach. Once again, they're experimenting every day towards their challenge, which is connected to the huddle board on the right side of that picture, which is connected to the safe room. And so I want to pause here for 1 second and say, a lot of times people will see here, see these boards, and they'll say, well, there's KATA. KATA is just that 20-minute meeting every day at the board. And that is really not true. KATA is being practiced on this board that acts like a canvas. But KATA is a mental model. Without the way of thinking, the board's not much use to you. And so, yes, we're practicing KATA here. We're acting our way into a new way of thinking, but you'll hear the KATA language in meetings where there is no whiteboard. You'll hear it at the huddle board. You'll hear it in the safe room. It just happens to be a lot more stripped here at storyboard where they actually practice KATA. So KATA is not confined just to that board. Then there's TWI. We do a lot of TWI work, training within industry, and we do what we call job instructions, job relations, and job methods. Job instructions is where we break down a job into important steps, key points, and reasons. And then as we're using the approach to teach a learner, we're trying to create a standard behavior. But we're not just trying to create a standard behavior for the purpose of just doing it. We're trying to create a standard behavior to move us toward a target condition. So we're doing it to move us toward a target condition. Now, it's not the only countermeasure, but it's a powerful countermeasure, because what we discover as we're getting into our current condition, many times we discover that everyone is doing a job or a task completely different. And as a result of that variation, it's causing mistakes and errors. So if we can create a standard behavior with training within industry, TWI, job instructions, to move us towards a target condition, that can be a big help. Once again, the blue card represents TWI job instructions. The yellow card represents TWI job relations. That's how we deal with people. At the end of the day, it's all about people. And then the green card represents TWI job methods. That's where we'll go into a job and just analyze every detail of that. And we're asking questions intentionally to see if there's something we can eliminate or combine or rearrange or simplify. But once again, the reason we're doing this is so that we can move us towards a target condition. Here's an example of Sandy and Pat. They're breaking down the job. It happens to be a blood culture using a central line, but we wouldn't do this just for the sake of doing this. We're doing this to create a standard behavior to move us towards a target condition. And there is another blood culture example. So this example is not to show you every tool, every subsystem, every part, but it's to show you how the linkage occurs and how we're trying to think about alignment and deployment. But there's other parts that we have and other parts we'll add in the future to this management system. But we always want to remind ourselves that it's just a model, and that instead of using the word entropy, I'll now use the word fragile. That's why sustainment is so difficult. An example of something we're experimenting with at one hospital is something we call the idea-driven organization. How do we allow every single person the opportunity to share ideas to make their world better? It's going very well. If it continues to go well as we experiment our way with it, then we'll eventually add it to the management system. So I just really wanted to bring attention to that. I want to bring attention one more time that the KATA is not limited just at that third level down at that board. I remember talking to a renowned expert of gear trains, and he told me, Skip, the most important thing about the gear train is the thing you can't really always see. That's the lubrication. Well, that's what the KATA is. It's that meta routine. I'm going to talk a little more about KATA, but I want to just emphasize that it's not limited just to that board. So here's a little more about the KATA and the roles. There's always a learner, there's always a coach, there's always a second coach. The learner and the team own the target condition and work to achieve it. The coach is responsible for teaching the improvement KATA and for the results. And the second coach, they're not always there, but when they are there, the second coach is responsible for assuring the development of the coach and assuring alignment to the organizational goals. So we're trying to develop skill sets as learners, as coaches, and as second coaches. One of the tools that we use for that is a model that was developed in the 80s called the Dreyfus model. And we're using that to make sure we're developing skills in our folks. At the beginning of a workshop or a class or even in school, the best that you really are is novice. You never develop skills in a classroom. You don't develop skills until you get out into the real world and make mistakes. So we want to get people up to the advanced beginner, the competent, the proficient, and then the final level is what we would like to call the eternal learner. I believe Dreyfus calls theirs the expert level. So we're using this just as a tool to analyze and measure the skills of our folks as we grow and develop them. So once again, this is only a model. A couple of other pieces to it just to point out is here's a subsystem called the shepherding group. Very important. The shepherding group helps us think about sustainment. One way to think about it is how do we KATA our KATA? And the shepherding group is a very, very important subsystem for long-term sustainment. Another piece that we've been working on is what we call Get Better Jumpstart. Get Better is part of our branding. We've just added the word Jumpstart to it. But one way to think about this would be a traditional Kaizen event done kata style. So I'm not real big on episodic events, but there are times when they're needed. So we've created this approach, and it's a way to help us catapult forward with some of our efforts. Once again, we want to be principle-minded. The Shingo Institute has done some great work around understanding how principles are connected. Actually, 3 of their insights was that ideal results require ideal behaviors. Beliefs and systems drive behaviors, and principles inform ideal behaviors. So as we're looking at our management system and as we're looking at our organization, we want to look through the lenses of the principles. We want to ask, is the work that we're doing respectful? Are we leading with humility? Or here's another example. One of the principles talks about flow. So you might be looking at your management system or at your organization and realize we don't have a lot of flow. We tend to batch a lot. We may want to incorporate that into our strategies this year. So once again, this is a mental model. It's fractal. I can use it at any level. It's content neutral. I can use it in clinical, non-clinical. It's an iterative process. And we're trying to create a meta routine that stays the same regardless of the circumstances. A routine way of acting and thinking. We're trying to act our way into a new way of thinking. So yes, I would make the argument that KATA plays very nicely with others. So I would like to finish by saying, please show me your thinking.